Hi, welcome back to the Chinese Medicine Podcast. I'm Marie Hopkinson, Chinese Medicine practitioner. And today on the channel, we're going to be talking about spleen energy deficiency. What is it? How can we help it? And what can we do to understand it? Like, why would understanding it even help us to be able to treat those things, the symptoms of it ourselves as patients rather than needing to go and see a practitioner? What could a Chinese medicine, like a herbalist or an acupuncturist, actually do for you? What is the spleen energy deficiency? And how can we help you if you have that? So it's a very, very common Chinese medicine diagnosis. And what happens when you get spleen qi deficiency, the main symptoms people get is bloating.
I'm gassy and I'm loaded.
Problems with their bowels, like diarrhea or loose bowel movements, on the looser side than the constipated side. And they tend to get things to do with their digestive system, or in a Western medicine sense, it can be the endocrinology kind of system as well. So things to do with hormones and regulation of your digestive system that's related to like your gut health, your absorption of nutrients and things like that. So if we go back a little step, because this is going to be a tutorial video, so it's a little bit more informational rather than like a bang, bang, bang. Here's the like, I'll give you some things you can do to help yourself for sure. Chinese medicine is all about understanding how our body interrelates with itself in a Chinese medicine framework, but also within the environment. And it is a very different system of medicine to Western medicine. So if you're not familiar with the general basics of Chinese medicine, I'll pop a couple of links in the description below and you can go and check that out. So the first video I'd recommend you watch to sort of inform you about this, either at the end of this or before this, and I'll cover some of that stuff in this video, is called Why Eat Mostly Cooked Foods, and that explains how the spleen and stomach works as a digestive system. So it's just another way of explaining it. So if you listen to this video and you're like, at the end you're like, Maria, I still don't really understand, well, go and watch that video and that will kind of give you a bit more information. Now, you might be listening to this on iTunes or Spotify or Anchor or different platforms there that the podcast is broadcasting on now. So welcome if you're listening only. If you're watching on YouTube, welcome as well. And so if you are listening to this podcast on the iTunes and things like that and you want to watch the podcast, I put all of the episodes onto YouTube and you can watch on YouTube as well. So welcome to this episode. We're going to be talking about your digestion mainly. And one of the very common diagnoses of Chinese medicine in TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine, called spleen qi deficiency. Now, what does it mean? So firstly, the qi of your body is the energy or the functional aspect of your body. Now, I'll sort of ad lib a little bit and explain a bit more about this, broaden this topic out a bit. Now, the style of Chinese medicine I do isn't TCM. So the diagnosis of spleen qi deficiency, we kind of think of that more as encompassing the earth element of your body. So the earth or the it's still the same idea, but we just don't use that label of spleen qi deficiency in classical Chinese medicine. So you might be watching this and you are a patient of classical Chinese medicine. Well, welcome as well, and I'll try and encompass these ideas into that whole system so you can kind of understand that as well. But I know a lot of patients get this diagnosis and they don't know what it means, and they've Googled it, and that's why I'm making this video, to kind of help you explain and help you understand, and for me to explain what that means. So your spleen in Chinese medicine belongs to the earth element, which the earth relates to spleen and stomach. Now, why is that important? Why bring that up, Marie? Because it's a functional system looking at how our body functions in relationship to the environment, and the earth is related to your digestion for a very good reason, because it is exactly like the earth. It's like as in the dirt, the earth. So if you think of a pot plant that's growing, what is needed for that plant to thrive, let's say, for that plant to grow and nourish? You can think of the pot plant example embodying all of the 5 elements in Chinese medicine. So the plant itself, the growth of the plant, would be wood, right? Because it is wood, so plants are wood in Chinese medicine. And then you need sunshine, which is fire. You need the warmth of the sun. Wood, fire, earth is the actual earth, the dirt that is in the pot plant. And then you have the metal, which is like the dryness of the environment, and also the elimination of the environment. So metal is like lungs and large intestine. So the actual air that's in Ayurvedic medicine, they think of metal as air, that element. And then you also have the oxygen and that sort of stuff, and the outside air environment. And then you have water, which is the water that you put on it. Now, in order for that plant to grow, it kind of needs the homeostasis. It needs the environmental support of all of those things. It can't have just one of those things. Or if it gets too much of one of those things, it won't thrive. It still might grow, but it might not thrive, or it might not grow at all, or it might start to die. And so that's kind of how we think about things in our body. So if you have a plant that is the earth of the plant needs water, but it doesn't like too much water. And so how do you get rid of too much water? Now, this is what we're thinking about in Chinese medicine. We think about spleen. The title of this video is like Spleen Qi Deficiency. What does that mean? So what happens is the earth can't support the proper nourishment of the soil, and it either gets too waterlogged, it either gets like bogged down with water, so there's too much water and not enough drainage, and so that plant starts to rot in there. And that is very often the case when you have spleen qi deficiency. It's like the spleen energy, the earth energy. And so, look, energy is a mystical word, and I'm only using it because you've probably been told that from Chinese medicine. But I tend to think of energy as function. So the functional aspect of that spleen, the functional aspect of the earth is deficient. It's not working properly. So what should the spleen do? We have to know that to know how would it get deficient and what would that mean. So your spleen's job is to transform and transport. What that means is, like the earth, like the actual dirt, the pot plant, when its job is to transform the water. So actually to utilize, so if water goes into a pot plant, in order for that tree to grow or that plant to grow, it has to absorb the water. So the earth's, the spleen's job is to kind of help do that. So you drink water and then your body can metabolize that water. It either can take that water into it and utilize it for some purpose, or it can excrete that water out. And the spleen's job is kind of deciding that. It's discriminating, do we need this or do we not need that in the digestive tract. Now, there's other elements that kind of help out with this as well. But that's one way of thinking of it. And so it's transforming food and fluids. So we talked about the fluids, and what about the food? Well, you get fluid from foods too. And the different kinds of foods you eat, this is why diet makes a big difference in spleen energy disharmony, because you can sometimes cause it to happen by eating too many foods that are what we call dampening foods. So too many waterlogging kind of foods that don't facilitate that free flow of that movement that's needed, and so therefore the pot plant might not have enough drainage. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a pot plant and you've put too much water in it. Well, the roots just rot, right? So what if you've put like a lot of water in something, or you've used a little container at the bottom that keeps the water in there. You've gone away on holidays and you've come back and that water's stagnant and hasn't moved anywhere. It's been very cold in your house, or you put too much water in and there's been no way for it to drain away. And so that stagnant water that's actually like dampness is kind of stagnant water. It's not able to move and it's become thick and like probably got bacteria and stuff like that growing in it now in that pot plant. And it's not helped it, it's actually hindered it. So water's good, but not too much water. Like water's good if it's fresh water, and water's good if it's being used. But when it's not being used, it kind of gets makes that plant kind of get bogged down. Well, that transforming and transporting function isn't working very well anymore. So how can the body digest the food and fluids properly? Well, it can't, and that's why you get that main symptom of bloating. So it's more in the whole abdomen rather than just in this part, because in this part it's mostly like your epigastric area is mostly related to your stomach, which is still related to the earth. So it could be that, but if it's that area there right under your breastbone, that would be more the epigastric area, and that's often a stomach disharmony. But it could also that in a Chinese medicine sense, this idea of spleen qi deficiency gives you this sense of bloating. So you get this fullness. Now, for the average person, it doesn't really, like when you go to a herbalist, they're going to know, like they might give you different herbs based on where that bloating is. But for understanding it from just a general perspective, it doesn't make too much difference exactly where that bloating is. But if you have bloating, it means there's an inability of your body to transform and transport that fluids. Now, why is that happening? That might be a bigger issue, might be a bigger reason. So if we go back to the pot plant, it could be because there's no drainage system for the water. So the water comes in, but there's not enough drainage for it. Or there's just too much water being put in. That person's just watering that plant. Like, you know, when little kids just love to water plants. Like my nephew just loves to water plants. He's like 1.5 years old. And he'll just keep watering them. He doesn't know when to stop. He just keeps watering the plants. And those plants are going to die if they have too much water, because there's they can get too much water going into that one space. So the other way to get rid of the water would be, one, to drain it out, but secondly, to get the sun on it. So if you water something a lot and there's no sun, you live in a damp environment, a place where it's very gloomy, or like I'm in sunny old Perth, so we don't have that problem very much. We have mostly dryness. So we have to water a lot more than the average area, I guess, because things dry out really quickly. And why do they dry out? Because the sun's there. So in a herb sense or a food sense, you could either stop eating the foods that are causing the damp. That would be a good thing to do. You could reduce those foods down, or you could actually include herbs in your diet, or use acupuncture to kind of facilitate either the drainage of water or to dry things up, like in a drying up, warming sense. So there's herbs that kind of warm the spleen, warm the earth, and help to dry it up. Now, the second main symptom that you get with problems in the earth element or spleen qi deficiency is diarrhea, loose stools. That is anything basically from a properly formed stool right through to complete liquid, right? So that would be loose. Now, the worse, the more liquidy the bowels are, the less formed they are. So bowel movements should be properly formed, which means like a sausage kind of shape. Like, so in the Bristol stool chart, they call it soft sausages. It's a bit gross to kind of talk about poops, but that is basically what we need to talk about it. So anything from like when it starts being less and less formed towards being looser and looser, and then the other thing that happens is it gets more and more frequent. So your body, your earth element or your spleen loses the ability to hold the yang, to hold the functionality of your body in it. And so it comes out more easily, more quickly. And this can happen when people get problems with digestion, where they eat something and they have to run to the toilet straight away, or they're just like, in an extreme sense, like this could be in illnesses like Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease, or something where like if your bowel, like, so again, this is another kind of conundrum of Chinese medicine, because you think, oh, Maury, but that's your bowel, that's not your spleen, right? Yes, you're right, it's not your spleen. Not your spleen isn't inflamed. Like in Western medicine, they'd say, oh, you've got an inflamed spleen, you must have, that's why you've got diarrhea. You're like, well, that doesn't make sense at all, Marie. You've said diarrhea, and that's not your spleen at all. Even your spleen doesn't do any of that stuff in Western medicine. So it's a functional system relating to these ideas and this element. So that's why the earth element is such a good example and analogy for it, to think of that. So, and I think that's why as Westerners we get really confused, because we're thinking, well, the spleen, why is Chinese medicine just giving it different functions? Why can't Chinese medicine just say what it really does and say that it regulates the blood cells and things like that in our body? Well, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But it is functional, and it is this understanding of when you understand all of Chinese medicine, which I don't, I'm still working it out, but the more macular you kind of look, the more macro you kind of look at it, the wider, the more you know, the more the micro bits kind of make sense. And so all of Chinese medicine school, pretty much the whole first year, and if not the second year, I was completely confused. I just went along for the ride, and I was like, well, I really want to learn this, and some of it made sense, enough for me to keep learning it. But a lot of it didn't make sense. It just kind of, and then one day it's kind of like, oh, the penny dropped, and it was like, yeah, that actually makes sense. And even like this, like the last 3 years, I've been learning a different system of Chinese medicine, and like there's stuff that I learnt in first year Chinese medicine that like I learnt it again in a different way. And I was like, oh, actually now that makes sense. And the whole time I've been just not understanding exactly how it works. So that's part of Chinese medicine is a commitment to a lifetime study of it. So don't think you can get fully understood in a YouTube video. That's not the purpose of this. But I do want to make people aware of that there's a bit more that everyday people can understand about it. And I think the more you understand about how it works, the more you're likely to be able to use it for yourself. And then you get the benefits of it. Now, if you don't understand it, or it's dismissed, and sometimes it's maybe dismissed because people think, well, that sounds like woo-woo, that sounds like mystical. And you think, well, the spleen doesn't do that in real life. Like, well, it does in a Chinese medicine sense, in a holistic, encompassing way, when we look at it as the earth function. So it's not the spleen organ that's doing it, it's the functional spleen system, let's think of it like that, or the functional earth system, which encompasses the stomach as well. And In Chinese medicine, the earth system encompasses a lot of hormonal regulatory functions, like that are done by our endocrine system in digestion and metabolism. So what we actually create out of the food that we eat, the nutrients that we eat, and how we metabolize those into products our body uses, the catalysts and things like that we need to make those changes, that is an earth element function. So making that stuff, which is hence why there can be it's not just the spleen, because it's often it's not just the earth, it's often the wood element that's got involved in this as well. But then you have functional changes that can happen with people where they just can't digest things properly, like they have food allergies or intolerances and stuff like that, and they may have started with a spleen qi deficiency where they just have bloated and a bit of loose diarrhea, like maybe loose stools every so often, and then the longer that goes on, the less strength their functional earth element has. And so what happens is when they eat certain foods, they get very severe reactions to the point where they'd say, well, I'm allergic to that, I can't eat that, I can no longer have that. And this is how Chinese medicine kind of views things like gluten intolerance or celiac disease and things like that. You can have a really extreme form of an intolerance where you have an allergy to it and your body cannot take that product in without having a massive reaction to it. Or you could have a small reaction that you have to something. So let's talk about gluten intolerance, where people don't have celiac disease. So that means they don't have an actual allergy to gluten, but they actually just, if they eat gluten or the products, if they eat something where there's gluten in it, they feel uncomfortable, they feel bloated. And so if they stay away from gluten, they'll be like, well, my earth element's fine, I don't have those symptoms, I don't have any problems. Does that mean that person has to stay off that food forever? Does that mean that their body will never recover from that? And does it mean that we should be even eating that if that's giving you those issues? So in Chinese medicine, one thing that makes us different to some other natural therapies is that we think there is a chance that we can strengthen your spleen or your earth element to the point where you could tolerate those things that once you couldn't tolerate. So I'm not talking about an allergy here, I'm talking about an intolerance. It doesn't mean that it's good for you to have that. So it doesn't mean it's good for you to have tons and tons of bread or lots of things with gluten in it, like cakes or stuff like that. But you may be able to have things that have gluten that are not as processed. So if you're interested in kind of understanding that, there's a video that I've done about dampness, what is dampness, and that talks about processed foods, like the impact of eating a lot of processed and how that induces a dampening effect on our diet. But there's things like, let's say barley contains gluten, but it may be a more easily tolerable type of gluten to your body than, let's say, processed bread or a muffin, where you've got lots of processed, you've got sugar, you've got processed grains, you've got other things kind of added in, and you've got lots of layers of processing and some of that product includes gluten. So it's not just always about the actual thing, the one thing of gluten. It may be about how you've consumed it. So how does this work out in the treatment sense? So a Chinese herbalist or an acupuncturist, if they give you a diagnosis of spleen qi deficiency, first thing they're going to want to do is to look at alleviating the main symptoms that you have, as well as strengthening your spleen or your digestive energy, and that will in turn alleviate those symptoms. So if you have diarrhea,
I have a bad case of diarrhea,
and you're losing a lot of liquids through frequent bowel movements, then if we don't stop that, that will eventually just make your body more and more depleted. So that's an important one. Sometimes eliminating the foods that are aggravating you for a period of time whilst you're doing the treatment. Some practitioners recommend to do that because there's no point in taxing your body even further. But then you won't know whether the treatment's working until you go to the cafe and have a muffin or have a cake and see what happens. Now there's lots of foods that are available very readily in society that we shouldn't eat a lot of, that we just shouldn't consume tons and tons of those foods. That doesn't mean that just because they're available and we can get them, like processed grains and processed meats and things like that have got a lot of sugar, salt, additives, and then there's also the highly productioned aspect of things. That doesn't help the spleen or the earth. It kind of makes it work harder. And so it's easy to kind of consume a lot of nutrients, and that could also make people get overweight because they easily could consume a lot of calories in one kind of sitting of eating those foods. So there's a couple of things there to kind of chew on, or food for thought, if you pardon the pun. So I hope that this has been useful and helpful to you, just to understand how your body, like how Chinese medicine views that the way that we get spleen energy deficiency, and that aspect of the earth element becoming damp or becoming overwhelmed with water or bogged down with water, and for it not to be able to sort of separate the pure and impure. So that's its main function that it wants to do. So it wants to separate the pure and impure. When the spleen energy is deficient, it means the function of separating the pure and impure is not working properly. And so the pure and impure can't be separated. That means you can't absorb what you need to absorb. And so then you would have issues with bloating or getting diarrhea, especially if it gets to a point where you get what we call spleen yang deficiency, where it's even worse than that. Then you'll get like undigested food in the stool. So you'll eat something and then bits of it will kind of be passing through you. Your body doesn't even get a chance to kind of digest it because your spleen's like, well, I'm so tired, I'm so busy. And that's the other symptom you get, is tiredness, like a lethargy. Your body feels really heavy, your limbs can often feel heavy and lethargic, and you feel tired. You don't feel better from exercise, you feel worse from exercise, kind of tired. If it gets even worse and your earth gets very, very weak, you might feel so tired that you just have to lie down a lot, and that's an even worse kind of like a yang deficiency of the earth, and you just can't like get the energy to do things, and you just want to lie down a lot. And the other symptom you get with spleen energy deficiency is you get a craving for sugar often. So it's kind of like your body wants a little bit of energy to help it digest the food. So especially if you get a craving for sugar after you've eaten a meal and you're like, oh, I just need something sweet, that's a sign that your spleen energy is struggling to digest the food you've put in it. So a couple of things you could do for yourself to help is, one, eat your foods more slowly. And then you'll probably eat less food, or you won't be overwhelmed with the amount of food. So if you're in a hurry, you're busy, and you're just scoffing that food down too quickly, then that can also cause you to get, it overworks your spleen. That's no good for you. So if you eat more slowly, often you'll enjoy the food more. So with carbohydrates, a really good thing to do, this is in the Healing with Whole Foods book by Paul Pitchford, he says chew your carbohydrates 30 times each in your mouth, so that the food combines with your saliva, and that helps the process of digestion. Eating and doing things at the same time really taxes your body as well. So what that means is, if you're mentally engaged with something, so either one, you're emotional, which is the worst level of that mental engagement, or you're just busy with your mind, like you're watching TV and you're really engaged in that thing, or you're having a very deep and meaningful conversation with someone. Eating at the dinner table is the best way to eat, rather than watching TV and eating. And you can have a little bit of a conversation, you can have enjoyment over food, and that's a good thing to do. And food is a very social thing, in our culture, but it's not a good idea to get emotional while eating. Like if you're eating and you're getting upset, having an argument, or you're trying to do a business deal while you're eating. Those are things that affect our spleen energy. Now, if you just did that once or twice in your life, it's not a big deal. But the issue is the habits that we create. So if that becomes a habit and that's what you do all the time, or you're sitting at your computer and you're kind of eating your food, that's not a good thing to do. So take 5-10 minutes away from that stuff, and then hopefully that'll lead to a little bit more time. But if you get a half an hour lunch break, don't be on your phone scrolling through your Facebook and your socials whilst you're eating. Like, spend some time, just go to the park, enjoy nature and sit there and eat your food, or eat with a friend, reintroduce some social aspects into eating, rather than it being something where you're kind of stuck on your phone or your iPad watching TV and things like that. So that would be my advice to you, is to create some really good habits around eating, so that you are nourishing your spleen and your earth energy. And the other flavor that's good for helping you, if your spleen energy or your earth energy is getting bogged up by a lot of water, the flavor that helps, similar to the sun, is like pungent foods. So warm and pungent. So ginger would be something like dried ginger, or fresh ginger you can even use that a lot in your cooking. You don't want to have so much pungent that you're kind of sweating. That's a different thing. So if you're trying to sweat out a cold and you're having that much pungent that you're kind of sweating. But there's different kinds of like drier pungents. So one of those things is Sichuan pepper. Like, pepper's a good one. So you put that, Sichuan pepper is like a Chinese herb, but and it's used in like a lot of Chinese dishes of pepper, but you could just use any old pepper that you buy, like your fresh cracked pepper, and put that onto your foods. That's a good thing to use. So pepper, ginger, and if you go to a herbalist, they'll be able to give you a specific formula that's right for you to kind of work out, well, does your earth element need the herbs to kind of dry up the earth? With acupuncture, you're kind of looking at facilitating the spleen's function, removing any blockages that might be there from an acupuncture perspective, so that it helps the free movement, and then it kind of frees up that movement. So that's very good if you've got like the issue, like I said, with the earth being filled with water and it can't drain away because there's a blockage there. There's a kind of a metaphorical aspect, but that's how acupuncture is really good, beneficial to kind of work for that. So I hope this video has been useful and helpful to you, and thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We're on the journey to reach 1,000 subscribers this year, so please click the subscribe button below. Share this video with your friends or family, people that you know that might be interested in knowing about how to help their spleen energy and their digestion from a Chinese medicine perspective. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you again on the next video.